Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another exciting installment of Math Notes. Go ahead and get your paper, get your spiral-bound notebook, however you're working on that. Make sure you put your name in the upper right-hand corner, student number, and if you want to include today's date, go ahead and include today's date as well. Our title for today continues to be Module 1 Notes, because we are still taking notes in Module 1. We are, however, getting pretty close to the halfway point. So, today we're going to continue with Module 1, Lesson 7. There we go, focus computer. We are rounding with decimal place values. Rounding with decimal place values. Okay. This is going to look pretty similar to regular rounding, but we're going out into the decimal places. Always makes things a little more interesting. Now this is lesson 7, which means we are going to start with a Roman numeral 5. There's our V for 5, and then we'll add 6, 7 onto it. So we add 2 more. 5, 6, 7. We add 2. Okay? Rounding with decimal place values, let's take a look at some important vocabulary. Vocabulary. All right, we'll start by talking about what rounding is. Rounding. When I talk about rounding, when we talk about rounding, what we're doing is we're changing one or more numbers. Changing one or more numbers to make operations easier. We're changing one or more numbers to make operations easier. Sometimes we end up with really long numbers. Sometimes we end up with numbers with a lot of different digits. And if we can round them, make them into something with a few more zeros, they're a little easier to work with. Now, rounding tends to get confused with our next word. I'm going to do the best I can to make sure that by the end of 5th grade, you know the difference between rounding and estimating. Estimating builds on this. Estimating builds on it. Estimating can only happen after, we're going to make that nice and bold and hopefully very, very clear, after rounding. And I'll show you what I mean by this in a few minutes. After rounding. Perform the operation, whatever the operation is. Okay. So for example, and these won't have decimals, it's just an example. If I give you 997 divided by 2, I want to cut that in half. Okay. A lot of you could divide this. I think all of you could probably divide it, but 9s and 2s and these numbers don't fit together very well. It would work, but it would be kind of a pain. If I don't need an exact answer, it would be better to estimate. Now this wavy little this wavy equals sign means it's not exactly the same. It's approximately. That's a big word, so I'm going to stretch it out over here a little bit. Approximately means almost. Not quite, but almost. Approximately equal to. Means it's close. Now, 997 divided by 2, again, we could do that, but it would take a minute. We'd probably have to write it out. It's usually a lot easier, 997. I'm just going to round this thing up. I'm going to round this number, just one of the numbers this time. I'm going to round this number up to 1,000. 997 is very close to 1,000. And we'll talk about the different ways to round, but trust me when I say it's pretty close. Now the second number, I usually don't want to mess with too much, especially if it's a single digit. So I'm going to leave it alone, 2. Because 1,000 divided by 2, this one should be pretty easy to do mentally. I mean, really, all you have to do is 10 divided by 2. 10 divided by 2 is 5, and then you just put the other zeros on. 0, 0, 0, 0, 500. We're going to go through step by step. I'm going to show you the procedure for this in case it's unfamiliar, if it's been a while, or if this is just different than the way you've done it in the past. But for now, rounding means changing one number into something that's easier to work with. 1,000, 100, any product or power of 10 is usually pretty nice. And then estimating is performing the operation after that. Okay. Again, let's go ahead and take a look at the actual procedure. Let's go through this and see how this will work. So procedure. Okay. Step 1. Step 1. This is key, and usually whatever you're working on, if it's a test, if it's a workbook question, it'll specifically say what place you're rounding to. You need to determine which place. Determine which place you are rounding to. Are you rounding to the tens? Are you rounding to the tenths? You have to be very careful. Determine which place you are rounding to. Determine which place you are rounding to. Okay. So let's say that I am being asked to round 73 and 492 thousandths. 73 and 492 thousandths to the nearest tenth. Okay, to the nearest tenth. Then I need to find the tenths column. I need to think back to my place value charts. I need to talk about what we've been practicing. Tenths. This right here, this digit, is in the tenths column. This is our tenths. So I'm going to put a little box around it just to kind of help me remember that's what I'm looking at. That number is where we're going to that digit, I should say, excuse me, is where we're going to be focused for a little while. Now step 2. Step 2. And if it had said round to the nearest 10, round to the nearest thousandth, I would have looked there. But this says tenth, so. Okay. All right, step 2. Look next door. Look next door. More specifically, to the right. Okay. Now we'll do a little bit of practice and we'll talk about number lines and how this works. But the short version is this. If I have 73 and 492 thousandths, and I know I'm rounding to the nearest tenth, I am going to look next door. I'm going to look next door. This neighbor is going to basically tell me what to do. It's going to tell me how I'm going to round. This neighbor is going to help us out. Now, I'm going to use a little bit. I'm going to use some sticky notes here. Okay. Actually, I'll just use one and I'll tear it in half. Why waste paper, right? I'm going to cover up everything except those two numbers. So now I've got 4 and 9. Now we know it's not really 49, it's 4 tenths, 9 hundredths, so on and so forth. But let's pretend just for a second it's 49. Now the question you're asking, should we leave the 4 alone? So this would turn into 40, or should we change it? Should we change the 4 to a 5? Should we make it into 50? Is 49 closer to 40, or is it closer to 50? we are going to figure that out. Now there is a trick to doing this. Again, in class, we will take a look at it. We'll use some number lines. We'll play around a little bit. But there's a trick to remember. Okay, there's a trick to remember. For step 3, this is what I was talking about a minute ago, we're going to change the digit, or don't. We might not have to. We'll see. That's what we're going to find out. We're either going to change the digit or not. We are trying to figure out, is this closer to 4/10, just 4/10, or is it closer to 5/10? And the way we do that, I'm going to copy this again, which I know you guys are going to love. Go ahead and write that down again. There's our 10ths spot. And there we are looking right there. Okay. You are going to ask this question. And you're going to ask, is next door ... So I'm thinking to myself, I'm asking this question about the next door neighbor. Okay? So I'm asking this about the 9. Is next door 4 or less? If it's 4 or less, and some of you may have heard this before, let it rest. Basically, our place that we're rounding to is going to look next door and it's going to ask its neighbor, it's going to say, hey, what should I do? If the neighbor is 4, 3, 2, 1, or 0, the neighbor says, hey, relax, rest. Just stay who you are. So we'll leave it at 4. However, if the neighbor is somebody different, if it's 5 or more, so 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9, if it's 5 or more, that neighbor is going to have different advice. That neighbor is going to say, let it soar. That neighbor is going to say, fly, go up, become bigger than yourself. Okay. So in this case, we're rounding to the 10th place. We're rounding this digit. The digit looks next door. Is it 4 or less? No. Is it 5 or more? Yes, it is. It's bigger than 5. It's a 9. It's big. So this digit in the 10th place is going to soar. It's going to go up. Looking at the example, thinking back to the example I mentioned earlier, 49. Remember when we covered up those digits and just looked at the 49? 49 is pretty close to 50, 50, so it would go up. 49 is much closer to 50 than it is to 40. So it doesn't make sense to go down to 40. That's why we're going up. 5 or more, let it soar. All right, number 4, step 4, we're just about done. Step 4, you want to keep in mind everything to the left. Now this is everything to the left of our boxed digit. Everything to the left stays the same. Everything to the left stays the same. The digit itself maybe changes or doesn't. Again, that's on step 3. But everything to the left stays exactly the same, and everything to the right, becomes zeros. Again, that may seem a little odd, but we want as many zeros as possible on the right-hand side because now we're getting closer to things that are multiples of 10 or products of 10, powers of 10. Those are easier to work with. We're going to get rid of all this junk that is just complicating things. Okay, so I would write it like this: 73 and, remember, 5 or more, the neighbor says let it soar. Not this. I'm not asking if this is 5 or more. I'm asking if the neighbor is. If the neighbor is 5 or more, and it is, then this digit gets to soar and it becomes a 5. Okay? Everything after that, the hundredths place, the thousandths place, they're becoming zeros. They're becoming zeros. And we've talked about before how we can basically just drop those zeros off. We don't really need them. So our original number, 73 and 492 thousandths, is approximately equal to 73 and 5/10. And 73 and 5/10 has fewer digits, which means it's probably easier to work with if I need to multiply or divide or anything like that. Now, obviously, there are lots of times where you need the exact specific number. We can't round for that, but rounding can still be helpful for checking our work. We'll discuss that more in class, but we're at about 16 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this video short. Oh, a little late for that, huh? We're going to stop. If you have any questions, if you have any concerns, make sure you write them down, email me, ask in class, so we can try to clarify. But that'll be it for today. We'll stop here. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'll see you soon.